Arthur Vance was one of the richest men in the world, a titan of industry whose name was etched onto skyscrapers and financial reports. But no amount of money could fix the silence in his own home. It was a cavernous, echoing silence that emanated from the second-floor bedroom of his only child, Lily. After firing 7 nannies, 5 housekeepers, and 3 world-renowned specialists, Arthur's desperation was a palpable thing, a ghost that walked the cold marble halls of his mansion alongside him. He could build empires, but he couldn't reach his daughter, locked away in a world no one could enter. Then a woman named Clara Mayhew answered his advertisement for a live-in housekeeper. She was unassuming, with eyes that held a quiet, sorrowful history he couldn't place, but felt a strange resonance with. She had no specialized degrees, no long list of glowing recommendations from other billionaires. She simply needed a job. He hired her out of sheer exhaustion, expecting her to last a week, maybe 2. He had no idea that her arrival would precipitate a shocking event that would break him completely, shattering the cold facade he had built around his heart and forcing him to confront a truth more terrible than his daughter's silence. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Clara's first week at the Vance estate was an exercise in observation. The house itself felt less like a home and more like a museum curated by a man who had forgotten what joy looked like. Every surface gleamed, every line was sharp and sterile, and the air was chilled to a precise temperature that seemed designed to discourage lingering. Her duties were laid out by the head of staff, a severe woman named Mrs. Gable, with the precision of a military briefing. The rules concerning the master's daughter, Lily, were the most stringent. Do not attempt to engage her. Do not speak to her directly. Do not touch her personal items. Maintain a distance of at least 5 feet. Her meals are to be left on a tray outside her door. She was, in essence, a ghost in her own home, a living portrait of grief that no one was allowed to touch. Lily Vance was 8 years old, but in the medical files Arthur had reluctantly allowed Mrs. Gable to summarize for Clara, she was a collection of diagnoses: severe nonverbal autism, profound developmental regression, unresponsive to external stimuli. The official story, whispered among the sparse staff, was that she had retreated into herself after the tragic death of her mother 4 years prior and had never come back. She spent her days in her room, a large, airy space with pale blue walls and a window overlooking a manicured, lifeless garden. She would either sit in a small armchair, rocking rhythmically, or lie on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Her only constant companion was a small, worn wooden horse, its paint faded and its edges smoothed by years of being clutched in a small, tight fist. Clara cleaned the hallways, polished the silver, and dusted the countless photos of a smiling woman with Lily's eyes, but her thoughts were always on the little girl in the room at the end of the hall. Clara knew loss. It was a cloak she had worn for so long it felt like a part of her skin. The ache in her heart when she heard the faint rhythmic creak of Lily's rocking chair was a familiar one. It was the sound of a pain that had no words. But it was on the 3rd day that she saw it. The inciting incident was not a dramatic event, but a flicker of life so small that anyone else would have missed it. Clara was cleaning the large bay window in the hallway outside Lily's room, her back to the partially open door. A small blue-feathered finch landed on the branch of a magnolia tree just outside. It chirped once, a sharp, clear note that cut through the oppressive silence. Clara paused, a sad smile touching her lips. And then she saw it in the reflection of the pristine glass. Inside the room, Lily's rhythmic rocking had stopped. Her head, usually tilted downwards, had lifted slightly, and her eyes, which were supposedly vacant and unresponsive, had shifted. For a fraction of a second, they tracked the bird's movement as it flitted from one branch to another. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, a ghost of a reaction. But to Clara, it was a seismic event. The file said she was unresponsive. The staff acted as if she were a doll. Her own father treated her room like a mausoleum. But a child who could track the flight of a bird was not entirely lost. A child who could be stilled by a simple bird song was listening. There was someone in there, a flicker of a girl, trapped behind a wall of silence. And in that moment, standing in the cold, sterile hallway of a billionaire's mansion, Clara felt a fierce, protective surge she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what was truly wrong with Lily Vance, but she knew, with an instinct born of her own deep-seated grief, that the diagnosis was a lie. The story everyone had accepted was wrong, and she, the quiet housekeeper, no one was supposed to notice, would be the one to find the truth. The thought was terrifying, a rebellion against the established order of this house of sorrow. But looking at the reflection of the small, still girl who had just betrayed a secret spark of life, Clara knew she had no other choice. Her own quiet, methodical work had just been given a new, clandestine purpose. Clara began her quiet campaign not with defiance, but with subtlety. She knew that any overt attempt to interact with Lily would be reported by Mrs. Gable and result in her immediate dismissal. Her approach had to be woven into the fabric of her daily duties, invisible to the cold, watchful eyes of the household staff and the ever-present security cameras. She was a ghost in the machine, and she would use that anonymity as her shield. Her first experiment was with sound. The memory of how the Finch's song had stilled Lily's rocking became her starting point. When she cleaned the hallway outside Lily's room, she began to hum. It was a simple, wordless melody, a lullaby from a life she had locked away in the deepest corner of her heart. The tune was soft, a gentle current of sound in the river of silence. She would hum it while she dusted the ornate frames of forgotten paintings, her movements slow and deliberate, never once looking directly at Lily's open door. For days there was no discernible reaction. The rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair continued, a metronome of sorrow. But Clara was patient. She had learned patience from loss, from the long, empty hours spent waiting for a dawn that brought no comfort. She didn't expect a miracle. She was searching for another flicker, another sign that the girl inside was listening. It came a week later. As she hummed the melody, she passed by the doorway and dared a quick, sidelong glance. The rocking hadn't stopped, but its tempo had changed. It was slower, less frantic, almost in sync with the gentle cadence of her humming. It was another small crack in the wall, another piece of evidence for her silent investigation. Her next experiment involved scent. The air in the mansion was sterile, scrubbed clean of any personality by industrial-strength cleaners. Clara remembered a small lavender bush in a neglected corner of the vast estate gardens. One morning, before her official duties began, she snipped a few sprigs and tucked them into the pocket of her apron. While cleaning Lily's room, a task she was only permitted to do for 30 minutes each morning, while Lily was taken by a stern-faced nurse for a bath, she gently rubbed one of the sprigs on the underside of the windowsill, a place no one would think to look or clean. When Lily returned to her room, Clara was busy polishing the floor several yards down the hall. She watched out of the corner of her eye. Lily went to her chair and began to rock, her wooden horse held tight against her chest. But after a few minutes, she stilled. She lifted her head, just slightly, and her small nose twitched. It was a delicate, animal-like motion of pure instinct. She didn't get up, she didn't look towards the window, but for a full minute she sat perfectly still, as if trying to capture and identify the faint, unfamiliar scent that had invaded her sterile world. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was more than instinct. It was curiosity. The doctor's reports described a child with zero interest in her environment. But this child, this quiet, sad little girl, was interested. She was processing new information. Emboldened, Clara grew slightly more daring. She knew her biggest risk and her biggest potential reward would be in connecting with Lily through the one object she held sacred, the little wooden horse. Mrs. Gable had been explicit. Miss Lily's personal effects are not to be touched, especially the toy. It was her totem, the last piece of her old life she clung to. Clara understood. She had her own totems, packed away in a cardboard box under her bed. A tiny hand-knitted blanket, a single worn baby shoe. They were anchors to a memory, too painful to look at, but impossible to discard. One afternoon, while Mr. Vance was away at a series of meetings and Mrs. Gable was preoccupied with an incoming delivery, Clara found her opportunity. She had noticed from her observations that Lily sometimes set the horse down on the floor beside her chair. Clara took a small, smooth polishing cloth and knelt just outside the doorway, pretending to be working on a scuff mark on the floorboards. Her back was to the room, but her heart was pounding. "That's a beautiful horse," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken to the child. The rocking stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with tension. Clara didn't move. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hand slowly rubbing the wood. My brother had one like it," she continued, the lie catching in her throat, morphing into a different, more painful truth. "He loved his horse more than anything." She risked a glance. Lily was staring at her. Her eyes, usually unfocused, were sharp and fixed on Clara's face. There was no fear in them, only a profound, unnerving stillness. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the wooden toy. Clara had breached the perimeter. She had spoken, and the child had listened. She held her breath, waiting for a scream, a retreat, anything that would bring Mrs. Gable running. Instead, Lily slowly, deliberately, picked up the horse from the floor and hugged it tightly to her chest, her gaze never leaving Clara. It wasn't a rejection. It felt like a question, an assessment. In that silent, electric moment, a fragile, unspoken communication had passed between them. Clara, the quiet observer, felt she was now the one being observed. The girl behind the wall was looking out, and she was looking directly at her. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a thunderclap but a quiet, earth-shattering whisper. It happened 2 weeks into Clara's tenure, on a Tuesday afternoon when a soft gray rain was streaking down the mansion's towering windows. The house seemed even more silent and oppressive under the weeping sky. Clara had been growing bolder in her small experiments, her confidence bolstered by the subtle shifts she had witnessed in Lily. The slower rocking when she hummed, the stillness when a new scent entered the room, the intense, focused stare when she spoke of the wooden horse. These were the data points of her secret hypothesis, the proof of a life hidden in plain sight. Today she decided to combine the elements, sound and memory. As she did her afternoon rounds, she left Lily's door slightly more ajar than usual, a subtle invitation. She began to hum the same simple lullaby, but this time, as she polished a large mahogany table in the hall, she added words. The words were soft, whispered into the cavernous space, not for anyone else to hear. They were words from her past, words she hadn't dared to speak aloud in years. "Hush now, little one. Close your eyes. The moon is sleeping in the skies." The song was about a lost star finding its way home. It was a song her mother had sung to her, and a song she had once sung to. She pushed the thought away, focusing only on the melody, pouring a gentle, melancholic love into each note. Inside the room, the rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair faltered, then stopped. Clara continued to sing, her back to the door, her hands moving in a slow, steady rhythm with the cloth. She didn't dare look. She felt that to observe the moment would be to break its fragile spell. "Sail on a dream to shores so bright, and I'll be with you through the night." A floorboard creaked behind her. It was a sound so out of place in the funereal quiet of the house that it sent a jolt through her entire body. She froze, her hand hovering over the polished wood. Slowly she turned. Lily was standing in the doorway. She had left her chair. She had crossed the 15 feet of carpet that was her entire world and was standing on the threshold, one small hand clutching the doorframe. Her other hand was pressed against her chest, holding the worn wooden horse like a shield. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, were fixed on Clara. They were not vacant. They were filled with a startling, heartbreaking clarity. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her song died on her lips. They stood like that for a long moment, two solitary figures in a silent, empty hall, the only sound the soft drumming of the rain against the glass. Then, Lily did something that defied every single page of her medical history. Her lips, which the staff claimed had not formed a word in 4 years, parted slightly. A small, raspy sound emerged, a voice unused and fragile. "Sing," she whispered. The word was a tiny pebble dropped into a vast, still lake, and the ripples it created shook Clara to her very core. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate. This was it. This was the undeniable proof, the irrefutable sign that she had been right. The girl was not gone. She was there. She had been listening all along. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Clara sank to her knees, bringing herself down to Lily's level, though she maintained a respectful distance. She didn't want to frighten her. She gave her a small, watery smile. "Okay," Clara whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, I'll sing." And she did. She sang the entire lullaby, from beginning to end, her voice soft and steady, despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Lily didn't move. She just stood there in the doorway, clutching her wooden horse, and listened. She didn't smile. She didn't speak again. But as Clara sang the final verse, Lily's grip on the doorframe relaxed, and one small tear traced a path down her pale cheek. When the song was over, she turned without a sound and walked back to her chair, leaving Clara kneeling alone in the hallway, her heart a wild mix of triumph, terror, and a profound, aching hope. The silence had been broken. A bridge had been crossed. But Clara knew, with a chilling certainty, that this miracle was also a secret that, if discovered by the wrong person, could get her thrown out of this house and away from the little girl she was just beginning to save. The fragile hope she felt was now tinged with fear. The real battle for Lily Vance had just begun. Arthur Vance lived his life through screens. The stock market ticker on his computer, the video conference calls on his tablet, and the network of security cameras that fed a constant, silent stream of images to the monitor in his home office. He watched the comings and goings of his staff, the changing of the seasons in his manicured garden, and the static, unchanging tableau of his daughter's room. He told himself it was for her safety, but he knew it was a form of penance. He watched the room she was trapped in because he was a coward, unable to bear entering it himself. The sight of her, so small and lost in the space that was once filled with his wife's laughter, was a pain he could not endure. So he observed from a distance, a king watching a silent, tragic play in his own castle. He had noticed the new housekeeper, Clara Mayhew, on the camera feeds. She was efficient, unobtrusive, almost invisible. She did her job and kept to herself. He had approved. The last thing he needed was another bubbly, optimistic nanny trying to bring Lily out of her shell with brightly colored toys and loud, cheerful nonsense. He preferred the quiet resignation that now permeated his home. But in the last few days he'd noticed a change in the silent feed from the second-floor hallway. The new housekeeper lingered. Her cleaning seemed to slow, to become more deliberate, whenever she was near Lily's door. And then he saw her humming. He couldn't hear the sound through the silent feed, but he could see the movement of her throat, the serene, focused expression on her face. It was a minor infraction of the sterile, silent protocol of the house, but it annoyed him. It was a disruption. The day it all came to a head began with a storm, both outside and within him. A multi-billion-dollar merger he had been orchestrating for months had hit a last-minute snag, and his fury was a cold, tightly coiled thing. He had ended a conference call with a sharp, brutal command and had swiveled in his leather chair to look at the monitors, seeking the numb emptiness of watching his silent house. That's when he saw it. The housekeeper, Clara, was on her knees in the hallway, and in the doorway to Lily's room stood his daughter. She was out of her chair. She was at the threshold. His heart stopped. He leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen, his mind refusing to process the image. Lily never left her chair, never. He watched as the housekeeper spoke, as his daughter stood, transfixed. He saw the woman's expression shift, saw the tears in her eyes, even on the grainy monitor. He saw Lily turn and walk back into her room. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him. It was a rage born of fear. What had this woman done? Had she coerced her, startled her, broken the fragile, miserable peace of their routine? All the specialists had warned him, do not disrupt the routine. Do not introduce new stimuli. It could cause regression, agitation. He shot up from his desk, his chair crashing against the credenza behind him. He stormed out of his office, his long strides eating up the marble floors. He didn't use the elevator. He took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, his anger propelling him forward. He found her still there, kneeling in the hallway, her head bowed. "What did you do?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that echoed in the hall. Clara scrambled to her feet, her face pale, her eyes wide with alarm and stained with tears. "Mr. Vance, I didn't—" "You were told the rules," he cut her off, advancing on her. "You were told not to interact with her, not to disturb her. I saw you on the camera. What did you do to my daughter?" His voice was rising, losing its controlled fury and tipping into raw, ragged panic. He was a man who controlled everything, and this woman, this nobody, had stepped into the one part of his life that was already shattered and had shaken the pieces. "I was singing," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I was just singing." "Singing?" he scoffed, the word tasting like poison. "You think a song is going to fix her? Do you have any idea the damage you could have caused? The world's best doctors, the top behavioral therapists, none of them could reach her. And you, a housekeeper, thought you'd try a lullaby?" "She spoke to me," Clara whispered, the words hanging in the air between them. A quiet detonation. Arthur froze. "What did you say?" "She asked me to sing," Clara repeated, looking past him towards Lily's door. "She said, 'Sing.'" He stared at her, his mind reeling. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. A desperate, pathetic attempt to save her job. Lily hadn't spoken in 4 years. Not a word, not a sound. "You're lying," he said, his voice flat. "Pack your things. You're fired." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. The pain in his chest was sharp, a mixture of his initial anger and a new, bitter disappointment he hadn't expected. For a fleeting second her words had sparked something in him, a flicker of an impossible hope. And he hated her for it. He hated her for making him feel it, only to have it be a lie. "No." The voice was not Clara's. It was small, raspy, unfamiliar. It came from the doorway of Lily's room. Arthur stopped, his entire body rigid. He turned around so slowly he could feel the muscles in his neck protest. Lily was standing there again. She had her wooden horse in one hand and her other hand was outstretched, not towards him, but towards Clara. Her eyes, those vacant eyes he could never bring himself to meet, were fixed on the housekeeper, and they were shining with a fierce, desperate plea. "Don't go," Lily whispered, the 2 words costing her a visible effort. The world tilted on its axis. Arthur stared at his daughter, at the deliberate movement of her outstretched hand, at the focus in her eyes, at the words she had just spoken. It wasn't a lie. It was real. His daughter, his lost, silent Lily, had spoken, and she had spoken to defend her housekeeper. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a wave of shock so profound it left him breathless. He looked from his daughter's pleading face to Clara's tear-streaked one. This woman he was about to throw out, this quiet observer, had done in 2 weeks what his fortune and his experts couldn't do in 4 years. The confrontation he had initiated had ended not with his victory, but with his utter, humbling defeat. The cold, impenetrable fortress he had built around his life had just been breached by a whispered lullaby and 2 impossible words. A tentative, terrifying alliance had just been forged in the silent hallway, not by his command, but by his daughter's. He had no idea what to do next. The days following the incident in the hallway were a period of fragile, unspoken truce. Arthur didn't apologize, the word wasn't in his vocabulary, but he did not fire Clara. Instead, he watched. He watched with a new, desperate intensity, his work forgotten, the stock market ticker ignored. He granted Clara permission to spend time with Lily, a verbal command delivered to Mrs. Gable with such clipped formality that it was clear he was both mystified and deeply uncomfortable with his own decision. The alliance was tentative, built on the shifting sands of his disbelief and Clara's quiet determination. He was a man who dealt in facts and figures, in assets and liabilities. Clara, he was beginning to understand, dealt in a currency he didn't recognize: patience, empathy, and an intuition that felt dangerously like magic. Clara, for her part, proceeded with gentle caution. She knew Arthur's trust was a thin sheet of ice, and she trod carefully. She began spending her afternoons in Lily's room, not as a caregiver, but as a quiet presence. She would sit in a chair by the window, reading a book or simply mending a piece of linen, and she would hum. Sometimes she would sing the lullaby, and Lily, from her rocking chair, would listen, her movements stilling. The wooden horse was ever present, a talisman clutched in her hand. The progress was slow, measured in millimeters. One day, Lily left her chair and sat on the floor, closer to where Clara was sitting. Another day, she made a soft sound, a hum of her own that vaguely matched Clara's melody. Each tiny step forward was a victory that Clara cherished, and Arthur observed with a confusing mix of hope and fear. It was Arthur who initiated the next step. One evening, after watching Lily trace the pattern of the sunlight on the floor for 10 minutes, a focused activity he had never witnessed before, he found Clara in the kitchen preparing a tray. "I want to understand what you're doing," he said, the words stiff and awkward, "and I want to understand what happened to her." It was a confession of helplessness, the closest he could come to asking for help. He led her to his office, the nerve center of his empire, and for the first time, he unlocked the digital files on his daughter. He pulled up years of medical records, therapists' notes, and specialists' reports. The screen filled with dense, clinical text, a mountain of jargon that had always served as a barrier between him and the reality of his daughter's condition. "They all said the same thing," he said, his voice low, gesturing at the screen. "Post-traumatic regression, a profound autistic withdrawal following her mother's death. They said she was unreachable, locked in." Clara pulled a chair up beside him, and for the next hour they looked through the files together. Arthur saw impenetrable medical terminology. Clara saw a story with missing pages. "What was she like before?" Clara asked softly, her eyes on a photo of a laughing toddler on the corner of the desk. Arthur flinched, the question striking a nerve he thought was long dead. He hadn't allowed himself to think about before. It was too painful. But looking at Clara's earnest, patient face, he felt an unfamiliar urge to try. He opened another set of files, these ones personal. They were home videos. His late wife, Elena, had been an avid videographer, always with a camera in her hand. He clicked on a file dated a month before the accident. The screen flickered to life, and the office was filled with the sound of laughter. A younger Arthur was on the floor of a brightly lit sunroom, a smiling Elena behind the camera, and a 4-year-old Lily, her hair in pigtails, was squealing with delight as she tried to stack colorful blocks. She was babbling, chattering, pointing at the family dog, her eyes bright and full of life. She was a completely different child. She was normal. Clara watched, her expression unreadable. Arthur felt a fresh wave of grief wash over him, so intense it was hard to breathe. This was the daughter he had lost. This was the ghost that haunted him. She loved to draw, he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. And she loved horses. Elena was going to sign her up for riding lessons. He pointed to the screen where the tiny Lily was holding up a crudely drawn picture of a horse. Clara leaned closer. "What happened right after?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "The reports here start about 3 months after your wife's passing. What happened in those first few weeks?" Arthur's jaw tightened. It was a blur of pain, of funeral arrangements, of a house suddenly empty of laughter. I wasn't here. I couldn't be. I threw myself into work. My sister came to stay for a while. And the doctor, Dr. Finch, he handled everything." "Dr. Finch?" Clara asked, her eyes scanning a document on the screen. "The one who signed off on the initial diagnosis?" "Yes," Arthur said. "Alistair Finch. He was a family friend. Elena's friend. He was a pediatric neurologist. He was a godsend. He managed her care, prescribed her medication for the anxiety, the night terrors she was having. He said she needed to be kept calm, that her system was too fragile for any stress." Clara was silent, but her gaze was sharp, focused on a specific section of a report. She pointed a finger at the screen. "This medication," she said, "Vexillate. It says here the prescription was for severe agitation. But the dosage, it seems very high for a child her age." Arthur squinted at the screen. He had never paid attention to the names of the drugs, the numbers of the dosages. He had trusted the expert. He had trusted his friend. Finch said it was necessary. He said it was the only way to keep her from hurting herself in her distress. Clara looked from the screen to the video of the vibrant, happy child, and then back to the clinical report. A seed of suspicion, cold and sharp, was beginning to plant itself in her mind. The timeline didn't feel right. The vibrant little girl in the video hadn't just faded away from grief. It felt more like she had been systematically erased. Together, they had found the first key artifact, the stark, undeniable contrast between the Lily on the screen and the Lily in the medical files. And with it, they had found a name. Dr. Alistair Finch. The investigation had begun, and the sterile quiet of the mansion now hummed with a new, dangerous energy. They were no longer just trying to heal a child. They were hunting for a monster who might be hiding in plain sight. The discovery of the Vexillate prescription became the focal point of their clandestine investigation. Arthur, a man accustomed to hostile takeovers and corporate espionage, channeled his formidable resources into this new, deeply personal war. He tasked his most trusted legal team with a discreet but thorough background check on Dr. Alistair Finch, while he and Clara continued their deep dive into Lily's past, searching for the truth hidden within the digital archives and the mansion's silent rooms. They worked late into the night in his office, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows on the walls. For Arthur, it was the first time in 4 years he had felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to a stock price. For Clara, it was a mission to give a voice back to a child who had had hers stolen. They found more videos, a treasure trove of memories Elena had stored on a separate hard drive. They watched Lily's first steps, heard her first words, saw her blow out the candles on her 4th birthday cake. With each clip, the contrast between the child she was and the child she became grew more jarring, more unnatural. Grief could steal a child's joy, but could it steal their vocabulary, their motor skills, their very essence? It felt wrong. Clara's intuition, which Arthur was beginning to respect as much as any analyst's report, told her they were looking at a crime scene, not a case study in trauma. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While searching for old photo albums in the attic, Clara stumbled upon a box labeled Elena's Journals. They were leather-bound, filled with her elegant looping script. Arthur hadn't known they existed, or perhaps in his haze of grief he had forgotten. He was hesitant to open them, to let his wife's voice into the room after so many years of silence. But Clara's gentle insistence prevailed. She might have written something, Clara urged. Something about Lily, something about Dr. Finch. With trembling hands, Arthur opened the first journal. They started reading from the entries dated in the year leading up to her death. Most of it was what he expected. Loving anecdotes about Lily, notes about her work as a gallery curator, plans for their future. But then as they got closer to the date of the accident, the tone began to shift. A name appeared with increasing frequency. Alistair. Eleanor wrote about her old friend, Alistair Finch, re-entering her life. At first, the entries were positive. He was charming, attentive, a comforting link to her past. But then a thread of unease began to weave through the pages. Alistair was over again last night, one entry read. He has such a strange intensity about him. He talks about the past as if it were yesterday. He made a comment about Arthur, something about how I chose the castle over the cottage. It was meant as a joke, but it didn't feel like one. A few weeks later, another entry was more direct. Had a row with Alistair. He's becoming possessive. He seems to think he has some claim on me, on my life, because we dated for a few months in medical school. He resents Arthur's success. He resents my happiness. I told him I needed some space. He didn't take it well. The look in his eyes, it was cold. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered Alistair being around more back then, but he had been consumed with a major acquisition and had paid little attention. He had seen him as a harmless, slightly pathetic old flame of his wife's. He had misjudged him completely. The final damning entry was dated 2 days before Elena's fatal car crash. Her handwriting was shaky, hurried. Alistair knows about my heart condition. I don't know how. I only ever told Arthur. He cornered me at the gallery today. He was talking about how fragile life is, how a person with a congenital weakness needs a protector, not a distraction. Hodge? He was talking about Lily, about me. He said Arthur couldn't possibly understand how to care for someone as precious as us. It felt like a threat. I'm going to tell Arthur everything tonight. I don't want Alistair Finch anywhere near me or my daughter ever again. She never got the chance. The next day her brakes failed on a rain-slicked road. It had been ruled a tragic accident. Now Arthur wasn't so sure. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Alistair Finch, the jilted ex-lover, consumed by jealousy and resentment. He couldn't have Elena, so he had positioned himself to control the one piece of her that was left, her daughter. He became the protector she had rejected. He had stepped into the void left by Arthur's grief and had become the sole authority on Lily's health. And he had used his medical knowledge not to heal, but to harm, the vexillate. It wasn't to treat agitation. It was to create the symptoms. It was a powerful neurosuppressant, and in high doses it could mimic the exact symptoms of profound autism: lethargy, unresponsiveness, loss of speech, developmental regression. He hadn't been treating a traumatized child, he had been systematically, chemically imprisoning a healthy one. It was a form of revenge so twisted, so monstrous, it was almost unbelievable. He was keeping Lily in a state of living death, a constant, painful reminder to Arthur of his failure to protect his family. Every day that Lily sat rocking in her chair, silent and unreachable, was another victory for Alistair Finch. The central reveal landed with the force of a physical blow. Arthur stared at his wife's handwriting, his knuckles white as he gripped the journal. The grief and guilt he had carried for 4 years curdled into a white-hot, righteous fury. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a crime. And the man he had trusted, the man he had led into his home, into his daughter's life, was not a friend. He was a monster. Beside him, Clara put a comforting hand on his arm. her eyes filled with a grim, sorrowful understanding. The mystery was solved. But now the most dangerous part was about to begin, confronting the architect of their family suffering. The decision to confront Dr. Finch was made in the cold light of dawn, after a sleepless night spent poring over Elena's journals and cross-referencing them with Lily's medical records. The rage had subsided in Arthur, replaced by a chillingly clear sense of purpose. He wanted Finch ruined, but he knew a direct accusation without irrefutable proof would be disastrous. Finch was a respected neurologist, a pillar of the medical community. Arthur was a grieving father who had been largely absent. It would be his word against a doctor's. They needed more than a theory. They needed a confession or a smoking gun. Their strategy was two-pronged. Arthur would use his corporate power to put financial pressure on Finch's private clinic, initiating a discreet but aggressive audit through a third-party firm, looking for any financial irregularities that might point to a motive beyond pure malice. Meanwhile, Clara would take the riskiest step. Armed with the knowledge of Vexylate's effects, she would begin carefully weaning Lily off the medication, which was administered daily by a nurse who reported directly to Dr. Finch. Clara knew the nurse, a stoic woman named Ingrid, followed Finch's instructions to the letter. Getting past her would be difficult. Clara's plan was simple but dangerous. She began swapping out the liquid Vexylate in Lily's morning orange juice with a placebo, a simple sugar water solution she prepared herself. For 3 days, the plan worked. Clara watched Lily like a hawk, and the changes were immediate and astounding. A light seemed to be returning to her eyes. She was more alert, more present. She spoke another word, horse. While holding up her toy for Clara to see, she even laughed, a small, rusty sound when Clara made a funny face. It was as if a fog was lifting from her mind, but their small victories were short-lived. Dr. Finch, perhaps alerted by the financial inquiries Arthur had initiated, or simply by a sixth sense for his crumbling deception, made an unscheduled visit to the mansion. He arrived on the 4th day, his demeanor a mask of professional concern. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to check in on our little patient," he said to Mrs. Gable, his smile not reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He went straight to Lily's room. Clara was there reading a story aloud. Lily was sitting on the floor listening intently. Finch stopped in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. This was not the vacant, unresponsive child he had curated for 4 years. This was a child who was engaged. He saw the new light in her eyes, the focus in her posture. His gaze flickered to Clara, and in that instant, Clara knew he understood. He knew his hold was broken, and he knew who was responsible. He didn't say a word to Clara. He performed a cursory check on Lily, his touch overly clinical, and then swept out of the room. An hour later, the retaliation began. A certified letter arrived, delivered by a court messenger. It was a temporary restraining order. Dr. Alistair Finch, as Lily Vance's primary physician, had filed a petition with family court alleging that a household employee, Clara Mayhew, was an unstable and detrimental influence on his patient. The petition was filled with fabricated claims that Clara was overstepping her duties, that she was practicing medicine without a license, and that her unorthodox methods were causing Lily distress and confusion. He twisted every sign of Lily's progress into a symptom of agitation caused by Clara. He cited her unusual attachment to the child as a sign of emotional instability. Effective immediately, Clara was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Lily Vance. Arthur was incandescent with rage, but Finch had played the system perfectly. He was the doctor of record. His word carried legal weight. To defy the order would be to risk losing custody of Lily altogether. The scene was brutal and swift. Mrs. Gable, her face a grim mask of duty, informed Clara she had 30 minutes to pack her things. Clara was devastated, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The thought of leaving Lily, of abandoning her just as she was starting to emerge from the darkness, was unbearable. Her final glimpse of Lily was through the hallway window. Nurse Ingrid was back at her side, holding a glass of orange juice. Lily saw Clara being escorted out the front door, and her face crumpled. She let out a cry, a raw, anguished sound of, "Clara, no!" and reached a hand out towards the window. But the door closed, and Clara was gone. The separation was a crisis, a cruel victory for Finch. For Clara, it was a torment. Housed in a hotel paid for by Arthur, she felt helpless, cut off from the child she had sworn to protect. For Arthur, it was a declaration of war. He was now alone in the house with the ghost of his daughter, who, back on the full dose of Vexillate administered by the loyal nurse, began to regress almost immediately. The light in her eyes dimmed. The silence returned. The rhythmic rocking started again. It was a nightmare, watching the progress they had made be systematically undone. Finch's retaliation was more than a legal maneuver. It was a demonstration of his power. He was showing Arthur that he controlled Lily, that he could switch her on and off like a light. He could give Arthur a glimpse of the daughter he had lost, only to snatch her away again. The crisis had pushed them back, separating the two people who knew the truth. But in doing so, Finch had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the fury of a father who had just been shown what was stolen from him, and he had underestimated the resolve of a woman with nothing left to lose. The battle lines were drawn. The fight for Lily's future was about to become very public and very ugly. The restraining order was a calculated blow, but for a man like Arthur Vance, it was also a catalyst. The cold, distant billionaire was gone, replaced by a father fueled by a righteous inferno of rage and purpose. Dr. Finch had intended to isolate and neutralize Clara, but he had instead unleashed the full, terrifying force of Arthur's wealth and influence. The discreet inquiries into Finch's finances became a full-scale forensic assault. Arthur hired a team of the nation's most relentless private investigators, former federal agents and intelligence analysts, and set them loose on every aspect of Alistair Finch's life. "I want to know everything," Arthur had instructed them in a voice like splintering ice. "I want to know where he buys his coffee, what skeletons are in his family tree, and every single dollar he has ever made, moved, or hidden. I want him dismantled." While the investigators dug into Finch's past, Arthur's legal team, a phalanx of the sharpest corporate lawyers in the country, worked on a counter-offensive. They filed an emergency appeal to have the restraining order lifted, while simultaneously preparing a massive lawsuit against Finch for medical malpractice, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraudulent misrepresentation. They began deposing every former employee of the Vance household, looking for anyone who might have witnessed Finch's unusual behavior over the years. Clara, though physically separated from Lily, became the heart of the operation. From her hotel room, she was in constant contact with Arthur and his legal team. She provided them with her detailed day-by-day journal of Lily's progress, a powerful document that chronicled her reawakening. Her observations were not clinical, but they were precise. She described the change in Lily's eye contact, the return of her fine motor skills, the nuances of her first spoken words. It was the human evidence that gave context to the cold, scientific data about the effects of Vexillate. More importantly, Clara provided the key to unlocking the final piece of proof they needed. "Nurse Ingrid," Clara said during a late-night call with Arthur, "she's the one who administers the drug. She's loyal to him, but she's not evil. I've seen her with Lily. She's stern, but there's a flicker of something, sadness, maybe? Pity? If anyone knows something, it's her." Ingrid became the new target. The investigators discovered she was a widow struggling to pay for her late husband's medical bills and put a son through college. Her salary from Dr. Finch was suspiciously high for a private nurse. They found evidence of several large, unexplained cash deposits into her bank account over the past 4 years. It was clear Finch was buying her silence. Arthur decided on a direct approach. He arranged to meet Ingrid outside the mansion, away from the watchful eyes of Finch. He didn't threaten her. He appealed to the very thing Clara had sensed in her conscience. He showed her a video on his tablet. It was a split screen. On one side was security footage of Lily from a month ago, rocking vacantly in her chair. On the other was a video Arthur had secretly taken during Clara's last week, showing Lily laughing as she and Clara played with the wooden horse. "This is what he is doing to my daughter," Arthur said, his voice quiet, devoid of anger, filled only with a father's pain. "This is the child he is forcing you to drug into silence every morning. I know he's helping you financially. I will double it. I will pay off your husband's debt and fund your son's entire education. All I need is the truth." Ingrid watched the video, her stoic facade crumbling. Tears streamed down her face. I didn't know," she stammered. "He told me it was a sedative to prevent violent seizures, that her brain was damaged. He said without it she would be in constant pain." The dam of her silence broke. She confessed everything. Finch had hired her specifically because of her financial vulnerability. He had created a fabricated medical chart showing a history of epileptic episodes. He had instructed her to report any signs of alertness or engagement from Lily as pre-seizure indicators requiring an increased dosage. She was his gatekeeper, the enforcer of his chemical prison. She agreed to testify. It was the smoking gun. They had an inside witness who could attest to Finch's deliberate, malicious deception. The legal team immediately filed for an emergency medical board hearing, presenting their evidence under seal. Finch's world was about to come crashing down. The confrontation was set. Not in a courtroom, but in the sterile wood-paneled hearing room of the State Medical Board. It was a more fitting venue, a place where Finch's entire professional identity would be dissected and destroyed by his peers. Arthur's lawyers had chosen this path because it was faster than the courts, and its verdict would be professionally fatal. The room was tense, filled with the board members, a collection of stern, unsmiling doctors, along with Arthur, his legal team, and Dr. Alistair Finch, who sat with his own lawyer, his face a mask of arrogant indignation. Clara was there, too. A judge had granted her a temporary waiver on the restraining order to allow her to provide testimony. Seeing her, Finch's composure flickered for a second, a flash of pure venom in his eyes. The hearing began with Arthur's lead counsel laying out the case, presenting a timeline of Lily's condition, supported by the videos of her before the accident and during her time with Clara. They presented Elena's journal entries, establishing Finch's motive of jealousy and obsession. Finch's lawyer countered, dismissing the evidence as circumstantial, the ramblings of a grieving, unstable woman, and the fantasies of an over-involved housekeeper. He portrayed Finch as a dedicated physician dealing with a difficult, tragic case. Finch himself took the stand, oozing a practiced, sympathetic charm. He spoke of his deep affection for Elena, his profound sadness at her loss, and his unwavering commitment to her daughter's well-being. He painted Arthur as a distant, uninvolved father looking for a scapegoat for his own parental failures. He was convincing, his lies polished and smooth. For a moment, a sliver of doubt seemed to cross the faces of the board members. Then Clara was called to testify. She walked to the stand, her heart pounding, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. She didn't use medical jargon. She spoke from the heart. She described the girl she had met, the flicker of life she had seen in her eyes. She described the sound of the birdsong, the scent of lavender, the power of a simple lullaby. She recounted Lily's first word, her first laugh, her desperate plea for Clara not to leave. Her testimony was a powerful emotional counterpoint to Finch's cold, clinical lies. "He says he was treating her," Clara concluded, her gaze locking with Finch's. But he wasn't treating her, he was burying her. The final witness was Nurse Ingrid. She entered the room, looking terrified, but as she began to speak, her voice gained strength. She methodically detailed Finch's instructions, the falsified charts, the orders to increase the Vexillate dosage whenever Lily showed signs of improvement. She produced bank statements showing the regular cash payments from a shell corporation linked to Finch. It was a systematic, irrefutable dismantling of his entire defense. The final piece of evidence was a single vial. Arthur's investigators had managed to obtain a sample of the Vexillate from the mansion and had it analyzed. The lab report was presented to the board. The concentration of the drug was 3 times the maximum recommended safe dosage for a child of Lily's age and weight. It was a poison, administered daily. Faced with Ingrid's testimony and the lab report, Finch's composure finally shattered. His face went pale, then purple with rage. He leaped to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Ingrid. "She's lying. They bribed her. This is a conspiracy by a man who uses his money to destroy anyone who gets in his way." His outburst was a confession. The mask was gone, revealing the raving, desperate man beneath. The chairman of the board slammed his gavel down, his face a mask of disgust. "Dr. Finch, that is enough." The verdict was swift and unanimous. The board recommended the immediate and permanent revocation of Alistair Finch's medical license. They also announced they were turning over all evidence to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for criminal charges, including reckless endangerment, assault, and practicing medicine fraudulently. Finch was escorted from the room by security, a ruined man, his arrogant smirk replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The vindication was absolute. As the room cleared, Arthur walked over to Clara. There were no words that could convey the depth of his gratitude. He simply reached out and took her hand, his eyes saying everything. Their alliance had weathered the storm. The monster had been defeated. Now it was time to go home. Clara's reunion with Lily was the true victory. When she walked into the mansion, no longer a secret but as an honored guest, Lily was in the main hall, standing beside a nervous-looking Mrs. Gable. For a moment, Lily just stared, as if unsure if Clara was real. Then, her face broke into a radiant smile. She ran forward not with the tentative steps of before, but with the uninhibited joy of a child, and threw her arms around Clara's legs. "You came back," Lily whispered into her skirt. Clara knelt and hugged her tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I'll always come back," she promised. The silence in the house of Vance was finally, irrevocably broken, replaced by the sound of a child's happy chatter and the promise of a new beginning. 1 year later, the Vance mansion was unrecognizable. The cold, sterile silence had been replaced by a vibrant, joyful warmth that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back, allowing sunlight to flood the once gloomy hallways. The scent of fresh flowers from the garden, now a riot of color tended to by Clara and a delighted Lily, had replaced the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner. The house was no longer a museum of grief. It was a home, alive with the sounds of laughter, of music from a small piano in the sunroom, and of the happy, confident voice of a 9-year-old girl who was rediscovering the world. Lily's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Freed from the chemical prison of vexillity, her mind and spirit had blossomed. She was attending a small specialized school where she was not only catching up academically, but was also making friends. She was curious, bright, and had a mischievous sense of humor that delighted Arthur to no end. The worn wooden horse still held a place of honor on her bedside table, but it was no longer a shield against the world. It was a treasured reminder of a time of darkness, a symbol of the quiet woman who had led her out of it. Arthur, too, was a changed man. The ruthless titan of industry had learned to leave his work at the office. He had rediscovered the man he was before grief had hollowed him out, a father. He now spent his evenings not in front of a monitor, but on the floor, helping Lily with a puzzle or listening to her read a story aloud. The lines of stress around his eyes had softened, replaced by a look of profound peace and gratitude. He had learned that his greatest asset wasn't his fortune, but the love of the small family he now cherished above all else. Clara was no longer the housekeeper. She was the heart of the home, a partner to Arthur and a mother to Lily in every way that mattered. Her own past sorrow had not disappeared, but it had found a place of peaceful remembrance, its sharp edges softened by the healing power of this new, unexpected love. She and Arthur had never explicitly defined their relationship, but it was understood in the quiet glances they shared across the dinner table, in the easy comfort of their late-night conversations after Lily was asleep, and in the way they worked together as a seamless team to nurture and protect their daughter. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by a shared journey through darkness into light. The epilogue of their struggle came on a warm autumn afternoon. The Vance Foundation was hosting a charity gala to benefit a new children's neurological health center founded in Lily's name and dedicated to ensuring no child would ever suffer as she had. Alistair Finch was serving the first year of a 15-year prison sentence, his name now a byword for medical malpractice and betrayal. At the gala, held in the mansion's now beautiful gardens, Arthur stood at a podium addressing the crowd of philanthropists and doctors. Clara and Lily stood beside him. Lily, in a pretty blue dress, was holding Clara's hand, looking out at the sea of faces with a shy but confident smile. For years, this house was a monument to what I had lost, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked at Clara. But today, it is a celebration of what we have found. We found that hope can be found in the quietest of places, that strength is not about power, but about patience, and that the greatest healing comes not from medicine or money, but from love. Latrice. Later that evening, as the party wound down, the three of them stood on the balcony, looking up at the stars. Lily pointed to the brightest one. "That's Elena," she said, her voice clear and sure. It was something Clara had told her, a way to remember the mother she barely knew. Arthur put one arm around Lily and the other around Clara, pulling them close. He looked at Clara over Lily's head, his eyes shining with a love and gratitude that needed no words. He had started this journey as a desperate, broken man, seeking a servant to maintain his empty castle. He had found instead a quiet observer who saw the truth, a fierce protector who fought for his daughter, and a loving partner who had rebuilt his world. The most valuable discovery of his entire life had not been a corporate secret or a market trend, but the simple, profound truth that the person who cleans your house can also be the person who cleanses your soul. True wealth isn't measured in what you own, but in the hands you have to hold when you finally find your way home. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that.